The tapping woke me at 3:17 a.m. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. I opened my spreadsheet, because of course I had a spreadsheet. Time, 3:17:42 a.m. Duration, ongoing. Pattern, consistent 4-beat sequence. Source, Mrs. Chen's basement next door. In 14 years of software development, I learned everything has underlying logic. Whatever Mrs. Chen was doing down there happened every single night at the exact same time, with mathematical precision. Sarah had said last week, finding me hunched over my laptop at 4 a.m., that I was debugging reality like broken code. She was right, but patterns don't lie. The sound had a quality that made my teeth ache, a resonance that seemed to vibrate in my bones. I'd tried earplugs, but the rhythm penetrated anyway, pulling me from sleep with clockwork precision. I minimized my code editor and pulled up the local newspaper website, thinking maybe I'd find construction permits or late-night repairs. Instead, I found something that made my hands freeze over the keyboard. Chen, Margaret, age 78, died peacefully in her sleep on October 3rd. Services were held October 6th at Riverside Memorial. October 3rd, 3 weeks ago. My coffee mug slipped from numb fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. If Mrs. Chen had been dead for 3 weeks, what the hell had been tapping in her basement every night since then? Sarah suggested the next morning, already sweeping up the broken mug, that maybe the family was cleaning out her stuff. Or they'd rented the place already. All reasonable explanations. That's what I loved about Sarah. She could find rational solutions to anything. I told her the timing was so precise, though. The pattern never changed by even a millisecond. Of course I'd analyze the audio files, she said. She kissed my forehead before grabbing her keys and suggested I go knock on the door, meet the new tenant. After she left, I stood at our kitchen window looking at Mrs. Chen's house. In full daylight, my nighttime fears seemed ridiculous. But I couldn't shake the need to understand. At 2 p.m., Mrs. Chen's house looked exactly like what it was. Empty and abandoned. Mail overflowed from the box. Windows were dark behind drawn curtains. No car in the driveway. The basement window was at ground level, hidden behind overgrown shrubs. I knelt on damp earth and peered through dirty glass into darkness below. Empty. Just bare concrete floor, an old furnace, metal shelving units along the walls. No furniture, no stored belongings, no signs anyone had been down there recently. But as I stared into that dark space, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The basement extended under both halves of our duplex. One long, shared foundation with a concrete wall dividing the two sides. A wall that looked newer than the rest. That's when I heard it, even in broad daylight. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, 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 tap. Faint, but unmistakable, echoing off concrete walls. I pressed my face against the cold glass, straining to see into the darker corners where shadows pooled like black water. Nothing moved. No one was down there. But the tapping continued. Patient and rhythmic. As if whatever made those sounds didn't care whether anyone was listening. I stumbled backward through the bushes and ran home with my heart hammering against my ribs. Something was wrong. That night at 3:17 a.m., I was ready with professional recording equipment. The tapping began, and I captured it in high-definition audio, watching the waveforms dance across my laptop screen. Mathematically perfect intervals. Exactly 1.7 seconds between each tap. 2.0 seconds between sequences. No human could maintain that precision for 20 minutes straight, night after night. During one of the longer pauses, I decided to test something. I knocked 3 quick taps against the wall. The response was immediate and impossible. The pattern changed. Instead of the usual 4-beat sequence, I heard 3 taps back. Then complete silence, as if something was waiting. My mouth went dry, but I forced myself to continue. I tapped 4 times, 4 taps came back perfectly mirrored. Then the original pattern resumed, but now it felt different. Purposeful. Aware. I started a more complex test. 2 taps, then 5, then a complicated rhythm I made up on the spot. Each time, the response came back perfectly replicated, like an echo that understood meaning. Whatever was in that basement wasn't making random noise. It was intelligent, responsive. And now it knew I was listening back. Every response felt more eager, more insistent, like something that had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally answer. The research took me 2 days of desperate digging through property records, newspaper archives, and police reports. The duplex had a pattern stretching back decades. Every 3 to 4 years, tenants died in their sleep. Natural causes, the reports always said. Peaceful deaths with no signs of struggle. Mrs. Chen was only the latest. Before her, David Martinez in 2020. Before him, the Winters couple in 2017. The pattern went back to the 1980s. An unbroken chain of mysterious but natural deaths. I found Mrs. Chen's medical records from her last doctor's visit 2 weeks before her death. The notes mentioned new sleep disturbances, episodes of sleepwalking that had started about a month earlier. The same progression Sarah was showing now. Whatever was in that basement wasn't just making noise. It was hunting. It used rhythmic sounds to hypnotize victims, to draw them into its territory where it could feed. And Sarah was next. The deaths always happened during the new moon, when darkness was deepest. I checked the calendar with shaking hands. New moon was in 2 days. That night I woke to tapping sounds coming from directly below my feet, from my own basement. Sarah slept peacefully beside me. The alarm clock read 3:17 a.m. I grabbed my flashlight and crept downstairs, every instinct screaming at me to stay in bed. My basement looked normal, but the tapping echoed off the walls. Impossible to pinpoint. I followed the sound toward the far wall, the one we shared with Mrs. Chen's house. Up close, I could see this section was different. The concrete was rougher, newer, like there had once been an opening here, later sealed with fresh cement. The tapping grew louder as I approached. When I pressed my ear against the cold wall, I heard something else underneath the familiar rhythm. Scratching, like fingernails dragging across concrete, like something on the other side trying to claw its way through. I jerked back, and the tapping stopped immediately. Complete, absolute silence that felt more ominous than any sound. Then it started again. But now it was moving, following the wall toward the stairs, following me. Each tap tracked my position as I backed toward the steps. When I reached the staircase, the sound moved directly below the first step, waiting. I ran upstairs and didn't come back down until morning. Nothing could have prepared me for what would happen next. The sleepwalking started the next night. I woke to find Sarah's side of the bed empty and cold. The clock read 3:45 a.m. I could hear slow, measured footsteps on the stairs, footsteps that matched the rhythm I'd grown to dread. I found her standing at the basement door, hand resting on the doorknob, eyes closed. Her breathing had synchronized with the tapping sounds from below. In and out, perfectly timed, like she was part of the same system. I whispered her name. Her hand began to turn the doorknob. I grabbed her wrist and her eyes snapped open. She looked around in confusion, taking in the basement door, my panicked face, the darkness surrounding us. She asked how she'd gotten there. Her voice was thick with sleep. She'd been dreaming about music. Not really music, but patterns of sound. It was so beautiful, she said. Like a song she'd been waiting her whole life to hear. I led her back upstairs, both of us trembling. But neither of us could sleep. The tapping continued until dawn, and I could see Sarah fighting not to get up. Her fingers twitched in time with the rhythm. Twice I had to physically restrain her from leaving the bed. When morning came, she had no memory of the struggle, but dark circles under her eyes suggested her sleep had been anything but restful. Tomorrow was the new moon. I spent the day preparing. Industrial concrete, soundproofing foam, acoustic tiles, the most powerful white noise generator I could find, and noise-canceling headphones, the expensive ones I use for work. If I couldn't destroy this thing, I could at least try to contain it. That night, I went to the basement at 3 a.m., 17 minutes before it would start. I needed to be ready. At 3:17 a.m. exactly, the tapping began. I responded with my own pattern, trying to establish communication one last time. I tapped out mathematical sequences, prime numbers, Fibonacci patterns. The responses came back flawlessly, but with elaborations that showed understanding beyond simple repetition. Then I tried Morse code. Stop, leave, go. The response was immediate and chilling, a complex pattern that seemed to pulse with hunger and anticipation. When I analyzed it later, the waveform looked almost organic, like a heartbeat or breathing rhythm. It wasn't interested in stopping. If anything, it was telling me it was almost ready to feed. Footsteps on the stairs confirmed my worst fears. Sarah was coming. She appeared at the bottom of the stairs, moving with the measured pace of someone in a trance. Her eyes were closed, but she navigated around boxes and furniture like she could see perfectly in the darkness. The tapping grew more complex as she approached, weaving intricate patterns that made even me want to move closer, to follow the beautiful mathematical precision. She walked straight to the sealed section of wall, her hands pressed against the concrete like she was greeting an old friend. Her fingers traced the edges of the newer cement, searching for weaknesses. That's when I saw it beginning to manifest. The wall was changing, concrete becoming translucent like dirty glass. Something moved on the other side, something that might have once been human but was now stretched thin and wrong. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a demon. It was something worse. What I saw defied description, but I'll try. Imagine a human body pulled apart like taffy, spread across the entire wall like a web of flesh and bone. The face was elongated beyond recognition, mouth stretched into a vertical slit that ran from where the forehead should be, down to what might have been a chin. Inside that mouth, I could see rows of teeth that looked like fingernails, yellow and ridged. But it was the eyes that made me understand true horror. Dozens of them, scattered across the stretched flesh like barnacles on a ship's hull. And every single one was watching Sarah with an intelligence that was ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. The thing pulsed in rhythm with the tapping, growing more solid with each beat. It was feeding on sound waves, using them to pull itself through from whatever dimension it normally inhabited. Sarah's fingers found a hairline crack in the concrete and began to pull. The sealed opening was giving way, or maybe the entity was pushing from the other side. Either way, the barrier was crumbling. I grabbed my noise-canceling headphones and jammed them over my ears. The sudden silence was jarring, but the effect on the entity was immediate and dramatic. The shadow thing recoiled like I'd thrown acid on it. Its form became less solid, less defined. It writhed against the wall, reaching toward us with tendrils of darkness that looked like elongated fingers tipped with bone, but unable to cross into our bubble of artificial silence. I lunged forward and grabbed Sarah, pulling her away from the wall. I pressed my backup headphones over her ears, and she jerked awake, confused but herself again. The entity's thrashing became more violent. Without sound to give it substance, it was just shadow and hunger, powerful but contained. It needed audio input to maintain physical form, to exert influence over human minds. But then Sarah's headphones slipped. Just for a second. Just enough for her to hear one complete sequence of taps. Her eyes glazed over immediately, and she lunged for the wall with inhuman strength. I tried to hold her back, but she was stronger than she should have been. The entity was lending her its power, using her body as a conduit. She grabbed a piece of broken concrete and began hammering at the sealed wall. Each impact sent cracked spiderwebbing across the surface. Behind the crumbling barrier, I could see the entity pressing closer, its stretched mouth opening wider, revealing a throat that seemed to go down forever into darkness. I had seconds to make a choice. I couldn't overpower Sarah physically. I couldn't reason with her. The headphones weren't enough. The entity had already established too strong a connection. So I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the white noise generator and smashed it against the wall as hard as I could, right where the cracks were deepest. The device shattered, but not before releasing a burst of sound, pure chaotic static at maximum volume. The sudden cacophony disrupted the entity's carefully constructed rhythm. Its form flickered like a bad television signal. In that moment of disruption, I grabbed Sarah and ran. We made it to the stairs as the wall behind us began to collapse. Not from the entity breaking through, but from something worse. It was retreating, pulling back into whatever space it inhabited, and the sudden absence of its presence created a vacuum that made the concrete implode inward. The sound was deafening. A thunderous crash followed by a hissing, sucking noise, like air being pulled into a void. I dragged Sarah up the stairs and slammed the basement door behind us. We collapsed in the hallway, both gasping for breath. When I opened my eyes, I thought it was over.
Sarah's eyes were clear again, but filled with tears. She whispered that she'd seen it. When she touched the wall, she saw what it was. It had been there for decades, maybe longer. It had been feeding on people one at a time, pulling them in during the new moon when the barrier was thinnest. And once it fed, it had to wait years before it was strong enough to try again. I told her it wouldn't get another chance. Not here. The next day, I went back to the basement. The wall had partially collapsed, revealing a dark space beyond. Mrs. Chen's basement. But something was different. The concrete rubble was arranged in a pattern. Not random debris from the collapse, but deliberately placed. And in the center of that pattern was a message, spelled out in chunks of broken concrete. Next door. I checked the property records. Our duplex was part of a row of 6 connected buildings, all sharing the same foundation, all with basements that had been subdivided decades ago. The entity hadn't been destroyed. It had just moved to a different section of the foundation, to a different hunting ground. I thought about warning the other tenants. But what would I say? That there's something living in the walls that feeds on people during the new moon? That it uses sound to hypnotize its victims? They'd think I was insane. So instead, I did what I could. I sealed our basement door, installed 3 layers of soundproofing, set up multiple white noise generators on battery backup, created a fortress of silence, and I started keeping track of the other units, watching for signs, waiting to see which neighbor would start looking tired, which one would mention strange dreams or sleepwalking, because the entity was still there, still hungry, still tapping out its patient rhythm in the darkness, waiting for someone to answer. We moved out 2 weeks later. Sarah thought we were leaving because of the structural damage to the basement. I let her believe that. Some truths are too dangerous to share. The house on Maple Street was perfect. Detached, separate foundation, no shared walls. I checked the property records going back 50 years. No unexplained deaths, no mysterious sounds, no pattern of tragedy. But I still wake up sometimes at 3:17 a.m., listening to the silence, wondering if I'll hear that familiar rhythm starting up again. And last week, I saw a moving truck at our old duplex. A young couple with a baby, excited about their first home. I watched them carry boxes inside, laughing and planning their future. I wanted to warn them. I wanted to tell them to leave, to run, to never go into that basement. But I didn't. because the entity had taught me something important. Some hungers are patient, some hungers are eternal, and some hungers can't be satisfied, only postponed. The tapping will start again. Maybe not tonight, maybe not this month, but eventually during some future new moon, someone in that building will hear a sound in the walls, a rhythmic pattern that seems almost musical, almost beautiful, and they'll listen, and they'll answer, and the feeding will begin again. I just hope it's not the couple with the baby, but deep down, I know hope doesn't matter. The entity doesn't care about hope or prayers or good intentions. It only cares about the rhythm, the pattern, the endless cycle of hunger and feeding that's been going on for decades, maybe centuries. And now I'm part of that cycle too. Not as a victim, but as a witness. Someone who knows the truth and has to live with it. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear Sarah's breathing synchronize with a rhythm that isn't there. I watch her fingers twitch in her sleep, tapping out patterns on the sheets. The entity didn't get to feed on her completely, but it touched her, left its mark. And I wonder, did we really escape? Or are we just waiting for the next new moon, when the barrier grows thin again, and the tapping starts up in whatever walls surround us? I don't have an answer. All I have is the silence of our new home, and the knowledge that silence is never really silent. If you listen carefully enough, there's always a rhythm underneath, always a pattern waiting to emerge, always something tapping in the dark.